Today's session will focus on the Max Phonics program specifically. Your students or some of your students have access to it by default. Some others you can choose to give them access. But once they do get that access to the program, it's pretty self-explanatory in a way because the system or the software does take them step by step through what they need to do. And regardless of which module they're assigned to, module meaning what type of sounds or what group of sounds they need to work with, the steps that they need to follow are going to repeat themselves throughout all the modules. As you know, the program, the Max Scholar program, and specifically Max Phonics is based on the Orton-Gillingham method or the Orton-Gillingham approach, which is a multi-sensory method to teaching phonics. We're going to see a very systematic and explicit sequence of steps that, as I mentioned, will repeat itself on every module that the students move through. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. Got a second. All right, and what I have here is actually my dashboard. On the dashboard, as you know, you can access reports, you can access the settings for your students. But most importantly for our topic today is that you can access the materials section. So I will be pointing out key materials that you should definitely look into in the Max Phonics section. The first one, I would say the most important one that you're going to need is the first file on this list. As you know, these are all downloadable files, either PDFs or Word documents or Excel sheets that will help you implement the program offline, supplement it through direct instruction, or simply just give you more background information as to the methods and the steps that are involved in the phonics program. So I'll go ahead and open that up. So we have it handy. And everyone with a teacher account has access to this. Let me open it up. Okay, here we go. So this sequence of steps, this sequence of steps is mirrored in the software or mirrored from the software. The difference between the direct instruction, which is this, the template for the direct instruction, and the software is that each one of those formats, let's say, will have a little bit extra. So on the software, you'll have auditory prompts, which you don't have on the offline instruction that you're doing. On the offline instruction, you have some dictation exercises, which you do not have in the software. So for every method, although most of the steps are the same, each of them will have a little bit extra touch that will allow you to reinforce the skill in a different way with your students. So I'm going to leave this open here. We have the steps that we need to follow. We'll go over them together. We have an empty template where I can fill in the information. All these empty boxes would be filled in with information that I, as a teacher, write in it. This is my script to deliver this lesson. And then on the last couple of pages of this document is a sample of what that lesson plan or that template looks like when it's filled in. So this is a lesson plan that has already been written out. It's for the group of letters S, R, C, K, E. And you see that all the boxes that were empty before are now filled in. We'll go over this in a second. For now, I just wanted to scroll down through the pages so you know what is in that document. I'm going to minimize that and go back to my software. From the dashboard, remember that you can switch over or go over to your students' site. What does that mean? It's not that you're logging into your actual student's account. You're still using your username and password. It's your same login, but you can switch the view. Here, I'm viewing Max Scholar as a teacher, but I can also view it as a student. So I'll go ahead and do that. In order to do that, I'll look on the top right corner of my screen. You'll see the orange button that says Go to MyMax. That's what I'll click on. And I'll log in. It seems like I logged out on another window. So, okay, I'll go to my Mac again, and that should take me to my account, but viewed as a student, the student view. As you know, your students get access to this, and they might have less icons on their screen based on their grade, based on the settings that you adjust for them. You have access to everything without restriction. So in PHONICS specifically, you can access any module at any time. Your students will have access by default to one module at a time. Give me 1 second. I'll pause to let some other people in that are in the waiting room. Okay. So here, if I scroll down, you can see the 4 modules that are in PHONICS. At the bottom of each of the module numbers, you'll see what the name of the module and what type of sounds are included or covered in it. The first 2 modules goes through consonants and short vowels. Many times, teachers ask me what's the difference between one and the other. The difference is that module 1 is a much more basic introduction to the letters and the sounds that the letter makes. So I'll see the letter P makes the sound P, and I'll associate it with the picture of a panda. I'll be quizzed on those things, but that's pretty much where it ends. It's the introduction to each letter, each sound, a picture associated with each letter, and that's that. On module 2, I'll have the same sounds. I'll have that initial introduction to the letter, the picture, the sound that it makes, but I'll also have sight words and sound blenders and fluency. So it's a much more complete sequence of this Orton-Gillingham structure or Orton-Gillingham approach. Those same steps that I just mentioned, including the sight words, the sound blending, and all of that, will also be present in module 3, but there it will be for blends. And they will also be present in module 4, this time for digraphs. So that's what I meant earlier when I was saying that the steps will repeat themselves throughout, because on modules 2, 3, and 4, the sequence of steps that we'll see will be exactly the same. The only thing that changes is what sounds or which letters I'm working with at any particular time. So let's say that I'm in module 2. We have different groups of sounds, and when I click on a particular group of sounds, I see the letters listed individually. I'm going to open up here type of list or bullet points that I have that list the steps that we're about to go through together. Here it is. Oop, zoomed in too much. Okay, so this is pretty much what I want us to focus on, everything that says PHONICS and everything under it. Modules 2, 3, and 4 will present me with all of these steps that you currently see on my screen. I said that module 1 is a shorter sequence of steps. Module 1 would end here where I'm highlighting. That step that I just highlighted, the auditory type in or write in the letters, that would be the last step of module 1. But modules 2, 3, and 4 continue on to the sound blending, fluency, sight words, control readers, and master quiz. So I'll go back to my module 2, and I want to just briefly go over the sequence of steps. And as I go along, I'll go back to my Word document with the offline instructions, just so you see how the steps mirror each other. So let's start with the software. I like going over the software first and then reinforce with the lesson plan. You might find that you want to do the other way around. That's up to you. I'll choose the P. So for every letter, in this case, the P, I'm going to be introduced to the sound or the letter through a visual, tactile, and auditory set of drills, exercises, screens, whatever you want to call it. And those are listed here. I'm going to be introduced to each letter or sound in a group through a visual, tactile, and auditory drill. So let's see what those look like.
This is the letter P. as in panda.
It makes the sound.
All right, for now, I'll mute it while it keeps going. The visual drill is where I see a letter, picture, sound. If I was on a different module, let's say for blends, then I would see two letters that make a sound, a picture associating an image with that sound, and then how to pronounce that sound. Same idea. You'll see that the same flashcards are going over again. That's because the first time, it's just an introduction to the student. This is the letter, this is the picture, this is the sound. The second time around, the student is prompted to repeat after the computer. And the third time around, the student is asked, what is the name of the letter? What is the name of the picture? What is the sound that the letter makes? Now let me pause here for a second to clarify something. The computer is not recording the student, not here and not on following steps either. Many things in the phonics program are just for practice, are just for build up to lead the student into the assessment part. What is the assessment part? The quiz that comes in between one letter and the next. So I just said that I'll be introduced to each letter or sound through a visual, tactile, and auditory set of screens or drills or exercises. After that, I'll have a quiz. That quiz is the only thing that will be recorded up until that point. So if I'm asked to say a letter, it's just for me to practice. If I'm asked to trace a letter, it's just for me to practice. I won't be assessed. I won't be, let's say, held accountable until I actually reach the quiz. So always keep that in mind, that these screens will not keep your student behind. They're not going to be stuck on something just because they didn't say the letter properly or anything like that. So for now, let's move on from the visual drill, which again is letter, picture, sound, to the tactile drill. That's where we'll trace the letters.
Watch and listen as the letter is written in the sky.
Down, up, and around.
Let's see that again.
Down, up, and around.
Now try writing the letter in the sand using your mouse.
So here, it kind of happened again, that it was demonstrated first that the P should be traced by going down, up, and around. And now I'm given the chance to do it after the computer. That's what happened on the visual drill too. And that's how you should go about your offline lesson as well. Always demonstrate things first, then have the student do it after you, to where you're still monitoring it. You can still correct them if they're doing something wrong, and then have the student do it on their own. See if they can do it independently. So here I would use my mouse to go down, up, and around. That's me tracing it here with my mouse. Ideally, your students should have a touch screen to do this, so they can just easily trace it with their finger. If they don't worry about it. Don't force them to do it with the mouse. Sometimes it's very hard to manage those finer motor drills. And again, they're not going to be held back for not doing this tracing. So you can just ask them to, with their finger, make believe do it on the screen. Just trace or practice tracing the letter P by going down, up, and around. Notice that I can move in between the steps two ways. There's circles on the top that say visual, tactile, auditory. I can click on those to move in between one step and the next or the previous one. And there's buttons at the bottom of my screen. Those will allow me to go backward one screen at a time. On the top, I go step by step. At the bottom, I go screen by screen, which is different. So I can go back, I can pause if I need to explain something to my students like I'm doing now. I can refresh the page to try again whatever is on that particular screen, or I can just move forward. In this screen, the system will not advance automatically because in theory, it gives the students time to trace the letter. So you need to prompt it to move forward. For that, I'll use the right arrow.
Now try writing the letter again.
Here, I'm going to mute it for now. I can trace it again by going down, up, and around. Now I'll use the circle on the top to move on to the auditory drill. On the auditory drill, we have different pictures. Those pictures represent words. We want to click on all of the pictures that start with the sound that I'm currently learning. Remember, I'm going one sound at a time, so I'm still on the P. And here you can see how many pictures are to be found. It's important to find all of them. Otherwise, it's an incomplete answer. And this is going to become relevant when we move on to the quiz. Here, I do suggest that you instruct your students to click on the speakers on the corner of each picture so that they hear what the picture is. Not all of them are easy to figure out just visually. So when they click on the speaker, they can have the word read out loud or pronounced, and then they choose. Yes, this starts with the sound P, or no, it does not. If it does, I'll click on it. So I'll click on pen, pineapple, pin, parking lot, and ladybug. And I'll click done. That's another important pointer to remind your students. Every time that there's a done button on the screen, make sure that they click on it. That is what submits the answers to the system. If I just click there and click on the right arrow, it's as if I didn't submit any answer. So make sure that they know that whenever there's a done button, they need to click on it. So here I'll click done, and I see that I actually got 4 questions out of 5, or 4 pictures out of 5. Ladybug does not start with that sound. As I said, the visual, tactile, and auditory drills are just an introduction. They're not going to keep me behind even if I get them wrong. So for now, I'll just click on the right arrow, and that will take me to the quiz. The quiz has 4 types of activity. The first one is this one that I have right now on my screen. The instructions, which I've muted, but remember that the students do have auditory prompts throughout, will be to click on all the boxes that have a specific letter. In this case, of course, the P. So I'll click on all of the boxes that have the letter P. And I keep emphasizing the word all, because if I don't choose all of the letters or all of the boxes that have the letter P, that's an incomplete answer. And in order to move on to the next letter, I need to have 100% correct answers. An incomplete answer is not correct. So I chose the boxes and I see the word done, so I know that I have to click on that. Now, I've done this quiz before, so I already have my score, but I'll just let you know what the other activities are. And for that, I'll round back to the bullet points that I was looking at. So activity 1 is the activity that I just did, click on all the P's. Activity 2 has to do with phonemic awareness. I'll see those pictures again, and I'll have to click on all of the pictures that start with that specific sound. At that point, however, the system is not going to tell me how many pictures those are. So it becomes especially important for the students to click on all of those speakers and make sure that they get all of the possible answers. Activity 3 has to do with phoneme recognition. I'll see videos of the letter being pronounced or different letters being pronounced, and I need to choose which video is doing the proper pronunciation of the letter P. And then activity 4 has to do with the tactile component or the tracing of the letter. And in that case, I'll see 3 videos again, but this time of the letter being traced. And then I'll have to choose which of those videos is doing or tracing the letter P correctly. Now, the only way that I can move on to the next part of the lesson or the next lesson, in this case, the next letter, is by having all of my questions answered correctly. Only if my screen looks like this at the end of the quiz, I'll be allowed to move on. When I click let's go, I will move on to the next part of the lesson. And if I have even one incorrect answer, when I click that let's go button, it's going to take me back to the beginning of that letter in order to review it. This means that the only way to move on is by mastering the current letter that I'm on. If I didn't fully master it, I got most of the questions right, the system will say, you're not ready for the next thing. Go back and review. And the system will do that automatically. So for now, since I did get everything right, I'm going to click on let's go. And that takes me to a new letter. and the steps will start over from the top. I'll see the visual, tactile, and auditory steps. I'll have the quiz for the F, and then I'll move on to the next letter. So for now, I'm just gonna skip a few steps ahead, and I'll pretend that within module 2, I already mastered that entire first group of sounds. That's the P, F, N, T, A. For each of those, I would have gone through the exact same steps: visual, tactile, auditory, and the quiz. So let's pretend that I did all of this. Next up would be the review. The review screens involve all of those steps together, or all of those sounds, sorry, together. And they're going to mix those letters and mix those sounds. Let me unmute here so you can see this first auditory drill of the review.
Type the letter that makes the sound T, as in taxi.
Here I'll use my keyboard.
Great. Type the letter that makes the sound T, as in taxi.
And they're randomized, so sometimes they'll be repeated, sometimes they'll be all mixed up.
Good job.
Type the letter that makes the sound A, as in apple.
Great.
Type the letter that makes...
You get the idea. I just need to listen to the letter and type it in my keyboard. Keep in mind that many things or many exercises on the program are randomized, or the order in which things are displayed are randomized on purpose. That's, let's say that, imagine that you're in a computer lab. Of course, right now we're not, but let's say that you're in a computer lab and you have students working next to each other on the same lesson. We don't want them to copy each other. So if we're on this screen where we need to type in the letters, your screen, or the order in which the letters show up in your screen, is going to be different than mine, and it's going to be different than the third person. I say this because some teachers have reached out to me as they're doing these online lessons, and they say, oh, but what I have on the screen is not the same as what the student has on their screen. And that's on purpose. So what I suggest for those cases is model things on your account, on your screen, and then have them do it independently on theirs. And then you'll be able to see if they were able to transfer those skills to their independent work. So model it first and then have them do it. For now, I'll move on to the next step, which is the sound blending. And up until this point, we saw one letter at a time. Now we're blending those sounds together, or those letters, into words and nonsense words. We add nonsense words because we want to make sure that the students are really trying to decode and read what's on the screen. Many beginning readers or struggling readers tend to try to memorize and guess just by different shapes. It's harder to do that if it's words that don't exist, because you probably have never seen that combination of letters before. So that's why we add nonsense words, for them to practice the sounding out of each letter. You'll see how one letter at a time is brighter, and then the word appears. So as that's happening, the computer is sounding out that for me and then pronouncing the word. So let's see the next word that comes up. Here I would hear p, a, f. And then as the word appears, I would hear path. So a few words will be mixed and matched with the letters that I've seen up until that point. For now, let's move ahead to the fluency. Here I have a bunch of different words and nonsense words. They'll start lighting up again in a second. And as that's happening, the computer is reading them for me, left to right, top to bottom. So first row, second row, third row. This is to demonstrate to the students how they're supposed to go over the fluency exercise, which is coming up, or starting actually, on the next screen. For that, since I want to move just one screen ahead and not an entire step ahead, I'll just use the right arrow at the bottom. And here I have my timer. When I click on that timer that has 60 seconds, that's going to start counting down. The instructions, remember I muted them, but every single screen does have prompts and does have instructions. In this case, the instructions are to read as many words as I can in 60 seconds in the same order that the computer showed me on the previous screen. So I would start on the top left, and I would go first row, second row, third row. If I reach the last word at the bottom, but I still have time on the clock, I'll start over from the top. So I would go at, app, pat, path, nap, fat, tap, tat, nat, taf, and so on. And if I still have time, I'll do that process over and over and over again. The goal here is to see how many words your students can squeeze into those 60 seconds. And here comes usually the question again. How does the system know how many words the student read? How does the system know if the words were read correctly or not? And the answer is, it doesn't. Remember that the software is not recording the student. This screen is for them to practice. In fact, you'll see that the timer will start over again from 60. It'll happen 3 times, or I can practice this. So I'll read to myself. I'll just practice and practice and practice. And then eventually, let's say once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, you will sit down with the student, call the student, and actually assess them on the fluency. That is the time that will count. Here, they just practice. When they're sitting with you or when they're talking to you, that's when they're actually going to be assessed, and you're going to listen to how many words they read total, how many mistakes they made, and you're going to deduct those mistakes from the total. So if the student read 40 words, but mispronounced 3, skipped through 2, that's 5 mistakes. I'm going to deduct them from the 40 words that they read in total. So the final score that I would give them is just the amount of words that they read correctly. So in that example that I gave, the score would be 35. 35 words read in that minute. After the fluency comes the sight words. Oh, and by the way, there's a place on the online reports where you can enter that fluency score. It's like a text box and you can manually enter it. Thursday this week, there's a reports webinar, so I'll be showing that. Here I moved into sight words. Sight words are written in red. They just need to be memorized and just read by looking at them. Many times you can't really sound them out. That's why we write them in red. Those are words that you just see and have to read. There's a few words introduced with each group of sounds. They're going to be read out loud for the students, and then the students need to read them themselves. I highly recommend that they make their own sight word cards, just so that they have their own deck that they can review. And then we move on to the last step of the review screens, which is the control readers. It kind of ties everything together. You'll see, if you read the words that are on the screen, you'll see that I'm mostly seeing the P, F, N, T, and A letters, the sight words that were just introduced. So as I move through the program, every step kind of introduces something new or touches upon something new, but builds on what was done before or reinforces what was done before. So I was saying that we were going over the review screens, which come after a group of sounds has been mastered. Now, after that review, I have another quiz. Pay attention to those screens that say quiz, or that say quiz in them, because those are the ones that, on one hand, will either allow the students to move on or not. And also, those are the things that are going to be populating the reports that you can pull up. That's where the system gets the data or the information that will be displayed to you on the reports. So I'll just briefly show the master quiz, and I'll show just a sample question, because on the master quiz, there's 4 types of activity, but there's multiple rounds for each of those. So for activity 1, there's going to be multiple questions. For activity 2, multiple questions, and so on. Okay, so this is a sample of activity 1. I need to click on the specific letter. Then activity 2 will ask me to click on the box that has the word tap, for example. Remember, whenever there's a done button, I want to click on that to log in my answer. Then we have sight words. That's activity number 3. And activity 4 has to do with control readers. So we kind of start dealing a little bit with reading comprehension as well.
Augustina, your screen is no longer shared.
Oops. Hold on one second. Thank you for pointing that out. Let me actually go a few screens back then just to show you what I was clicking through. Okay, you can see it now, right? Okay, perfect. So activity 1, choose the letters. Activity 2, click on the box that has a certain word. Activity 3, once again, click on the box that has a certain sight word. And then activity 4 has to do with the control readers. And then I'll get my score. Again, only having everything answered correctly will I be allowed to move on. If I have even one of those things answered incorrectly, I'll be back, or I'll be bumped back to review whatever sections I missed. So that's how I move in between one group of sounds and the next, and also between one module and the next. Let me just go back here to show what I mean. Here, let's say that I was on module 2 and I finished the PFNTA by going through each of those sounds individually, by going to review, and by mastering that master quiz. That would have taken me to the second group of sounds, the SRCKE. And then I'll go over the same sequence once again, one letter at a time, one quiz at a time, reviews, master quizzes. Once I do that process for all of the sounds there, I would be moved up to the next module. The next module would be module 3, and that would be for blends. And the same sequence of steps will start over again. One sound at a time. This time it'll be 2 letters, but still it's considered one blend. So it's one part of the lesson, quiz, reviews, master quizzes, and so on. When I finish module 4, which is digraphs, I'm done with phonics. So at that point, you might want to lock your students out if you don't want them to just keep going on a loop in phonics, or you can keep it open for them so that they can go back and review. Now, very quickly, I want to compare those steps that we just went over with this offline lesson. Remember, this offline lesson is really a template that you can use to build your script. That's what you're going to be reading off of when you're delivering the lesson. You're going to dictate sounds, you're going to dictate words, you're going to have the students trace letters in the air. Similar to what is on the software, but this time you are the voice. You are the one that's telling the students what to do. You are the one that's monitoring it as they're doing it. So I want to go step by step over these and make that correlation with the software, as well as pointing out the relevant materials on the dashboard. So remember, I'm going to go back to the dashboard to remind you where I got that from, that Word document. I went to materials, I went to Max Phonics, and what I'm scrolling through right now is this first document called Lesson Plan, Steps, Instructions, Template, and Sample. I added here, and I frequently update this file, teacher samples. So some teachers send us their version of those lesson plans. You might want to look at them, see how other teachers are implementing the program or phonics programs specifically in their classrooms. And then from that point on, you'll notice that every document has a number at the beginning, right? That number represents the step of the lesson plan that that document goes along with. So step number 1 is the visual drill. These 3 documents that start with the number 1 would help me to deliver or to add extra exercise or to assess that particular step of the lesson plan. So you have the that's not what I wanted to click out of. Here, you have the instructions of what the visual drill entails. On the software, remember, is letter, picture, sound. And you have the instructions. Use sound cards. These are your sound cards. Most of you have them with the P and the panda in the back. So you'll use your sound card to introduce each sound. You'll flip the card with each prompt. Letter, picture, sound. The way that I introduce it, again, I'm the voice. I'm not relying on the computer at this point. I would say this is the letter P, as in panda. It makes a sound P. Then I'll have the students do it or repeat it after me. And then I'll just ask them, what's the name of the letter? What's the name of the picture? What is the sound that the letter makes? And I have those for all the letters, of course. What happens if you don't have this? If you have other type of cards, use them. Or let's see what supporting materials I have on the dashboard. Again, I clicked out. Okay. So for the visual drill, we have how to make the sounds. This is just a guide of what sounds are voiced, which ones have that sound at the end and which ones do not. So this is more of a guide for you, the teacher. Then I have visual drill sound cards for modules 1 and 2. Let's click on that. So this is something that you could print out. You can download it and send it home to the parents for them to do the introduction or do the review. Point at the letter P, point at the panda, point as you're making the sound P. Letter, picture, sound. That's what the visual drill entails. So if you don't have these official cards, you can make your own, you can print them out and kind of make your own sets. And you have those for blends and diagrams, of course, as well. Step 2 is the tactile drill. Same as on the computer, that's where I trace the letter. So the instructions here are to show the students how to trace. First, making big arm or finger movements in the air. And it's important to say the instructions as you're tracing the letter. So I would say down, up, and around as I'm doing it. Then you would have the students either, they can trace it on sand. If you don't want to get messy or that messy, you can use Ziploc bags with paint in them. You can use construction paper. Anything that has texture will be good. The idea is that the students, the forearm, the idea is that the students have that tactile component where they're tracing something and filling it with their finger and going down, up, and around. And I see that there's questions in the chat box. I'll address them in a second. So first you do big hand movements in the air, then you trace on sand, paper, paint, forearm, wherever that is. And then you actually practice with pen and pencil on a piece of paper, the tracing of the letters, the finer motor drills. So steps 1 and 2 of the offline lesson or the direct lesson are done for each individual sound. So I would do P, panda, P, trace it. F, fox, trace it. N, nurse, N, trace it. T, taxi, T, trace it. A, apple, A, trace it. Then I move on to steps 3 and beyond. So if you compare it to the software, this would be what I have highlighted right now, would be the introduction to each letter. And from steps 3 and down would be the review screens. So starting with step 3, we have the sound dictation. The instructions are to dictate 10 letters or sounds in a randomized order. And the instructions are for you to say, write the letter that makes the sound T, as in taxi. And the students write it down. This is the same as that screen with the boxes on the software that say type the letter that makes the sound. Here you're just actually asking them to write the letter or trace the letter that makes the sound. Then we have sound blending and tapping. We had that on the software as well, where I had one letter plus another letter. What you can do here is, if you have alpha chips, which are these looking things, disregard the tape. You have one letter plus another letter, and they tap as they sound out each letter, and then they blend. So here, I need a vowel actually. I would have, obviously this is better done on a table and not on in the air, but I would do p, a, and then trace it into the word path. What happens if you don't have alpha chips? You'll have your sound cards. And I'll do the same thing. P, a, path. P, at, path. And you play around with building these words. T, a, p, tap. So you blend and tap, or tap and blend actually. And the instructions are that you're going to tell the students to form the word tap, form the word pat, form the nonsense word af, for example. And as you move on through the group of letters, the groups of letters or the groups of sounds, make sure that you're not only reinforcing the current group of letters in your own, but also all of the previous sounds that you're done as well. So that the students kind of keep adding sounds to their sound bank or their letter bank. Then we have the fluency. If you notice, it's also the same order in which these skills or drills appear on the software. For the fluency, as you know, on the computer, they're just practicing. But here, you're going to use the list of words to time each student individually. Like I mentioned, you're going to give them credit for the words that they read correctly. So I don't have the list of words. Does that mean that I have to go into the software and click around until I can find it? No. Remember, you have supporting materials. What you need to look at is what step is the fluency? Step number 5. I'll go back to the material section. I'll scroll down to where I see the number 5. So here you have all of the things that have to do with the fluency. Instructions, what should be expected, how many words should be read, the actual word list that you're going to use. For example, this one for the FNTA. You can also send this home, have the parents sit with the student and practice it. And then you're going to assess them, give them a score. You also have a chart here that you can use to track the progress that they make each time. So you can color it in however many words they read, list the mistakes, and so on. Let's keep going with the steps. And we have sight words. Oh, I forgot to say something about the previous step, actually, about the sound blending and tapping. Option 1, you have the alpha chips, and that's how you tap and blend. Option 2, you have your sound cards that you printed out or that you have from your reading deck, and you do it that way. Option 3, you didn't have either of those and you don't have a printer, so you just took index cards and you made your own. Option 4, you can just use the fingers. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with this if you've used any other Orton Gillingham-based phonics program. So here I would do 1 tap per letter, p, at, and then I run through the letters like that with my thumb, pat, p, at, pat, t, ap, tap. Same idea. Now let me go back to the sight words. You're introduce sight words by reading them, spelling them, and then ask the students to do the same for you. Remember, we write these words in red to differentiate them from these words that are going to be tapped and blended. And you can do it a few ways. Plain old index cards and have the students make their own. And I would do, this is the word the, T-H-E, the. This is the word has, H-A-S, has. Option 2, take this thing that if you've been on my trainings, you know that I always forget what this is called. But it's like a mesh type of, or plastic, and it has a lot of texture. So you put a piece of paper on top, and with a crayon, you write on it. And I don't know if you can see, but there's like a texture to it. So I feel it as I'm writing it, and I also feel it as I'm running my finger through it. I think tactile will really help the students internalize information. So use the tactile as much as you can. Tracing the letters, using the sand, tapping on my arm, tapping with my fingers. Everything that's tactile really does help the students a lot. So I can do the simple index cards, the paper with the mesh plastic thing, or I can use my arm. And this is different than the finger tapping. Here I'm sounding out letters and blending them. Here I'm spelling and tapping per letter. So if I have the word with, W-I-T-H, with. If I have the word the, T-H-E, the. So this tapping is different than this tapping. This is for sight words. This is for individual sounds that become words. If you don't know which sight words to use, of course, you would look at step number 6 on the material section, and you can find extra words in there or the words that go along with the software, so you can reinforce those as well. Here, since you're building this lesson, you're writing this lesson plan, you have a little bit more of freedom. You can add more words. You can add the words that are convenient for you and your instruction that particular day or that particular week. So make sure that you understand the steps so that then you can maybe take steps that you don't need to do with your students at this particular time. Add steps that you want to reinforce with your students. Add more words, make it more difficult, make it simpler. It's up to you. The purpose here is for you to have the steps, understand them, and then tweak things a little bit for your particular students. After the side words, we have the spelling dictation. Here, I'll choose 10 words from the word list, that one that I used in the fluency, and I'll dictate the words to my students. This is something that is not in the software. This is just on the offline instruction. And I would just say, write the word pat, pat. They would write them down. Then we have the sentence dictation, also not a part of the software, but it's part of the lesson plan. This you would probably use with higher grades that need that phonics reinforcement. You probably wouldn't use it with kindergartners, let's say. But fact is that you're going to come up with sentences and dictate them to the students. They say it back, and then they write them down. And then the last step is the control readers. At this point, you can take the ones from the software, which you can print out from the material section, of course, or you can come up with your own. So let me just scroll down. Remember, here you have the empty lesson plan. So this is where you would start writing in what sounds you're going to cover. Here's where you would make your cheat sheet as to how to write each letter. And just let me scroll down to where it's actually filled in. It's going to make more sense that way. Here, so this is the lesson for the SRCKE. These boxes that say SRCKE would be representing my sound cards. S as in sun, it makes a sound. R as in rain, and so on. Here are the instructions. I need to model it for the students, and then they have to do it. So for the S, I go around, turn, and around. For the R, I go down, up, and half around. For the C, I go around and around. So like I said earlier, this is my script. This is what I'm reading off of to deliver the lesson to my students. Very important, like I said, steps 1 and 2 are done for each letter in the sequence individually, one by one. And then I move on to steps 3 and beyond. This is the randomized order in which I would dictate the letters for them to write or trace. These are the words and nonsense words that I will ask them to tap and blend with my alpha chips, with their finger, or with the cards that I have or made. On the fluency, I just have an empty table where I can put that my student Jada read 13 words in that minute. WPM means words per minute. My student Charlie read 27 words per minute, and so on. These are the side words that I would make index cards for so that I can read them out and spell them for my students. I can have them do the index cards themselves. These are the words that I would dictate for them to write. Here are my sentences that I'm going to dictate as well. Obviously, reinforcing the sounds and the side words that I just used. So keep that in mind, that the side words that you introduce here should appear on the sentences. You're trying to build a lesson that makes sense, that where one step follows the other, and you're kind of reinforcing as you go. So I would do the sentences, and then I would have the story and the control readers. So you can see how the steps follow each other. On the software, for example, I have the pictures with the words. I don't have that on my offline lesson. On my offline lesson, I have the sentence dictation, which I don't have in the software. So for the most part, the steps are the same. They're just a little bit here and there that's going to be different. Last thing that I want to show you before I address the questions on the chat is this. It's additional worksheets that I came up with as I was going along. If you guys have workbooks that you purchase with the program, you probably left them at school. So don't let that stop you from coming up with additional exercises or worksheets that you can send to your student. I did this in Word. It took me about maybe 10-15 minutes to do it. So here, this would be for the tactile component. Here I would have the students trace the letter P. I would also have them practice the capitalized version of the P. Here, since I didn't have the pictures with the words on the offline component, I just went into Google, took some pictures, and I'm asking them here to circle the ones that start with the sound P. So I would circle the panda, the pool, the pacifier. Here I came up with an extra activity. Look at the pictures below and complete the words using the available letters. So I have the picture of the panda. I know that that starts with a P, and I need to organize the available letters to complete the word panda. And these are the words, by the way, that are in the back of my sound cards. Here also, I came up with something else. Then it's based on the steps that I already had on the template. Read the list of words below to your students one by one, have him or her trace them, write them, or form the words. And then this one is a little bit more advanced. Write sentences using the words in the 2 columns below. You can add more words, but make sure each sentence includes at least one of the words from each column. So I have words that start with the sounds that I'm learning, sight words, and I give them a spot to write original sentence. Again, I probably wouldn't do this with kindergartners unless you know that your kindergartners can deal with it. Otherwise, I would leave for higher grades. So let me go over the questions in the chat. First, if we have a question about something you went over, can we email you? Of course. I'm going to go ahead and type in my email here on the chat box. If you don't already have it, you'll have it now, and you'll have it tomorrow because I'm going to send you the recording of the webinar. Jasmine asks, if a child practices fluency maybe twice a week or with a partner, will the words stay the same each time or a new set? Good question. So you decide what group of, well, actually depends. If the students are in the software, what they're going to be tested on or what they're going to be exposed to in the fluency is the letters or the words from the group of sounds that they just went over. It's not going to change from week to week. It's going to be the same order. And if you're doing the offline lesson, how do you decide which list to print out or which list to work on with them? My suggestion is look at the reports, look at what the last group of sounds that they fully mastered is, and use that. So if they did the PFNTA last week, you tested them on that, on the PFNTA group of sounds, or list of words, sorry. If this week they still haven't mastered the next group of sounds, but you want to assess them again, you would use the PFNTA list again. So only test them or assess them on lists of words that they've mastered those sounds completely on the software. Steve asks, whenever I go to the dashboard and click on any of the reports or materials, it just keeps loading and loading. Anyone else have this problem? I do know that some people do. Go to maxscholar.com, the main homepage, log out, log back in, and that should, in theory, solve the problem. And if not, shoot me an email. Alexandra says, make sure you're using Google Chrome. It works best. Absolutely, Alexandra. Yes. Make sure that you only use Google Chrome, regardless of what device you're on. An iPad, a phone, a tablet, a Mac computer, whatever it is, make sure that you have Google Chrome. That's a good point. Another question, will the students still receive workbooks for at-home use? The workbooks are ordered by the school, so it really depends if the school purchased them, and at this point, if they took them out of the school. Because I do know that many schools that had them, they just left them there and they can go back to the classroom right now. So that's why they're relying on making these worksheets as they go.